What if I told you that Edgar Cayce, the most documented psychic in American history, warned that some of the most dangerous spiritual vulnerabilities don't happen during death, but in the silence of night, at midnight, while you're still very much alive? What if I told you that in several overlooked readings, Cayce described a hidden time window between midnight and 3 a.m., when the soul becomes especially exposed to attacks from lower spiritual entities, subconscious forces, and psychic interference? This wasn't guesswork. Cayce's insights were drawn from what he called the Akashic Records, a universal memory field containing the soul's entire journey through time. And in these readings, he detailed how the veil between physical and spiritual worlds becomes thin and permeable at night, especially around midnight, creating a portal through which both inspiration and destruction can pass. Before we dive into these alarming and eye-opening revelations, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to learn could change how you approach sleep, dreams, and your very spiritual survival. Have you ever woken up at exactly 12 a.m., drenched in sweat, paralyzed, with fear, unsure of whether you were dreaming or experiencing something else? According to Cayce, you weren't just imagining things. You may have experienced a midnight spiritual attack, a moment when your energetic defenses were lowered, and something from the unseen tried to get in. Today, I'll reveal 5 shocking discoveries from Cayce's readings about these nighttime threats, why your soul is most vulnerable between midnight and 3 a.m., and what you can do to spiritually protect yourself. Let's start with what Cayce called the psychic breach hour. What if the very hour you lay your head to rest is also the hour your soul becomes most exposed? Edgar Cayce, often referred to as the sleeping prophet, hinted at something deeply unsettling in many of his trance readings, that the hours between midnight and 3 a.m., the time when most of the world sleeps, are not merely a quiet interlude of night, but a period of psychic exposure. Referred to in some circles as the breach hour, this interval carries spiritual implications far beyond what modern science is equipped to explain. Cayce, whose unique ability to access a trance state allowed him to tap into an ethereal repository of knowledge, repeatedly pointed to this window of time as being peculiarly thin. Not thin in terms of light or silence, but in terms of spiritual barriers. According to his readings, particularly those dealing with sleep, dreams, and the spirit world, the veil that separates the material realm from the invisible becomes less defined in these hours. It is not merely superstition that cultures across the globe describe midnight as a mystical or haunted hour. Cayce's insights suggest that this reputation is rooted in metaphysical truth. One of the core ideas expressed in Cayce's readings is the concept of vibrational frequency. He often described every entity, human, object, or spirit, as existing at a specific vibrational state. During daylight, the body and mind function at higher frequencies. We are alert, active, and consciously rooted in the material world. But as night falls, and especially as sleep deepens, our vibrational rate slows. From roughly 12 a.m. onward, this decline accelerates. The brain enters delta wave activity, and the soul begins to drift into realms beyond conscious awareness. This transition, though natural and healthy under normal circumstances, comes with a catch. Our spiritual immune system is at its weakest during this phase. Sleep researchers today acknowledge that the human body follows a circadian rhythm, an internal clock regulating sleep and wakefulness. Cayce, however, pushed this understanding further by adding a spiritual dimension. Between midnight and 3 a.m., he implied, the soul is not just asleep, but partially unmoored. While the physical body remains in bed, the spirit ventures beyond. This condition, Cayce stated, creates a temporary opening, a breach through which external influences might intrude. It is a state of liminality, where the self is neither fully in this world nor fully detached from it. And in this suspended, in between, dangers can creep in unnoticed. In Cayce's terminology, dreams served as the primary terrain where such influences operated. He emphasized that dreams are more than psychological residue or memory processing. They are experiences of the soul in motion. When the body rests, the soul travels, seeks, encounters, and learns. But not every encounter is beneficial. Just as one may meet enlightening energies, so too might the soul brush against distortive forces. He described these as entities of lower vibration, whose motives range from mischievous to malevolent. These entities, drawn to the vulnerability of a partially detached soul, tend to operate most effectively during the breach hour, when spiritual defenses are weakest and awareness is dulled. What makes this period even more volatile is the shifting state of consciousness involved. Most people, around midnight to early morning, pass through multiple stages of sleep. Initially, there is light sleep, then deeper delta stages, and eventually REM, where dreams occur most vividly. Cayce warned that these shifts are not merely physiological. They are thresholds between levels of awareness. At certain points, the soul is more surface-bound, while at others, it floats into subtle dimensions. Between these transitions lies the danger. Confusion, fragmentation, and disorientation can open the psyche to manipulation or psychic residue. Cayce once likened this psychic vulnerability to walking through a fog with your eyes closed, believing you're safe while unknowingly surrounded. In several readings, he advised spiritual practitioners to fortify themselves with prayer or meditation before bed, especially if they sensed unrest, fear, or unusual dreams upon waking. Such advice stemmed from his understanding that just as one wouldn't sleep with the doors of their home unlocked, neither should one enter slumber without energetic protection. Prayer, intention setting, and even reading sacred texts before sleep were methods Cayce prescribed to seal the soul against unwelcome interference. But why does the thinning of the veil happen specifically at this time of night? Cayce attributed it partly to the Earth's electromagnetic cycles. Between 12 o'clock and 3 a.m., global electrical activity decreases. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency, enters a quieter phase. In tandem with this, human brainwaves slow, and the Earth's aura, as Cayce called it, becomes more transparent. It's as if the Earth, too, sleeps, and in that shared dormancy between the macrocosm and microcosm, spiritual passageways open naturally. Ancient traditions, from Native American vision quest to Tibetan dream yoga, also speak of these hours as being ripe for vision or invasion depending on the state of one's mind and spirit. Cayce was especially concerned with what he called unconscious suggestibility. In the breach hour, the mind is more susceptible to suggestion, not from the self, but from other planes. Entities, energies, or even unresolved emotions can embed themselves more easily in this state. This is one reason why people often report waking from midnight dreams with lingering dread, confusion, or heavy emotional residue. According to Cayce, those are not mere byproducts of the subconscious, but energetic imprints of something or someone encountered in the liminal space of spirit. Not all such experiences are dramatic or terrifying. Some are subtle. A change in mood upon waking, a sudden doubt planted in the psyche, or the adoption of fears that didn't belong to the dreamer the day before. Cayce considered these to be as spiritually significant as overt visitations. He taught that what one absorbs in the breach hour often echoes into waking life, altering decisions, relationships, even physical health. Hence, he urged people not only to examine their dreams, but also to pay attention to the precise timing of those dreams, especially those occurring between midnight and 3 o'clock a.m. Another layer, too. Cayce's warning involved a thinning veil's relationship with ancestral and karmic patterns. He believed that during these hours, souls sometimes encountered echoes of past lives, ancestral emotions, or karmic energies in need of resolution. While this could be transformative when processed consciously, it could also be destabilizing if ignored or misunderstood. In some cases, recurring nightmares or spiritual visitations were tied to unresolved karmic threads attempting to surface for healing. And, unsurprisingly, these too often emerge during the breach hour. As sleep concludes and the clock pushes past 3 a.m., the spiritual atmosphere begins to stabilize again. Cayce noted that after this point, the soul begins its slow return to full embodiment, reintegrating its energies and reestablishing connection with the physical form. The veil thickens once more, the psychic breach closes, and a sense of spiritual cohesion returns, assuming no foreign elements have lodged themselves during the night's vulnerable window. While the veil begins to thicken after 3 a.m., the residue of what has passed through it does not always vanish with the rising sun. In fact, much of what happens during the so-called psychic breach hour, particularly the unwelcome impressions and emotional disturbances, stems not from random dream fragments, but from actual encounters. Edgar Cayce emphasized that during these early morning hours, we are not merely experiencing disjointed symbols from the subconscious. Rather, we are often interacting with spiritual forces, some of which are not benign. He warned especially about earthbound spirits, fragmented thought forms, and lower vibrational entities that inhabit realms parallel to our own. These presences, though usually imperceptible in waking life, become remarkably active in the night. Cayce's readings describe these entities not as mythological devils or cartoonish demons, but as energetic realities, beings, and forms of consciousness that exist in the lower astral planes. He described the astral world as a layered continuum, a spiritual geography where the state of the soul determines its location. Just as light rises, denser energies settle. These lower realms are not hell in the traditional sense, but states of stagnation, confusion, and spiritual inertia. The beings that inhabit them are often those who, through attachment, fear, or trauma, have resisted transition after death. They remain tethered to the earthly vibration, and as such, gravitate toward those whose energies they recognize or can exploit. These entities do not need a visible form to affect us. Cayce noted in multiple sessions that such spirits often manifest as sensations, emotional intrusions, or persistent mental states. They are frequently encountered in dreams, not because the dream state creates them, but because the loosened boundary during sleep allows our consciousness to intersect with theirs. He explained that fear, exhaustion, or mental agitation can magnetize us toward their level of vibration, much like a radio dial slipping into a lower frequency. When that happens, what was previously out of range becomes disturbingly clear. In one reading for a young woman plagued by recurring nightmares, Cayce identified a disincarnate soul clinging to her aura, attracted by her unresolved grief. The dreams were not symbolic expressions of loss, as psychologists might assume, but attempts by the earthbound spirit to communicate, or in some cases, siphon energy. This was not possession in the dramatic sense, but a form of psychic parasitism, where the entity remained attached by resonating with the host's emotions. These cases weren't isolated. Cayce addressed many instances where individuals experienced not only nightmares, but also symptoms like unshakable fatigue, confusion, and anxiety that could not be traced to physical causes. Perhaps most revealing were his insights into how these lower entities gain access. Contrary to popular belief, it isn't random. According to Cayce, the key is resonance. Lower beings are drawn to unresolved emotions such as resentment, anger, guilt, or addiction states that lower a person's spiritual vibration. These emotional patterns function as psychic doorways, signaling that the individual is already vibrating at a level that allows for interaction with these entities. He explained that harboring resentment is like leaving a door open in the rain. Eventually, something unpleasant is going to drift in. Even momentary lapses, such as intense envy or a spike of hatred before bed, can invite the attention of such energies. What makes this even more complex is that not all these encounters are conscious. Many individuals wake up feeling agitated, frightened, or physically drained without remembering a single dream. Cayce explained that the soul can experience encounters in subtle dimensions that leave energetic imprints, even when the conscious mind has no recall. These imprints can then influence moods, decisions, or health in the waking world, leading the individual to carry emotions that feel out of place or even foreign. Often, people internalize these influences, assuming the sadness or fear is there on, never realizing it may have been absorbed. During a vulnerable sleep state, it is not always full entities that cross into our space. Sometimes it is thought forms, energetic constructs, created from repetitive emotion or belief. Cayce described these as semi-autonomous psychic residue, capable of influencing the dreamer like a looped program. For instance, someone who harbors self-hatred might inadvertently generate a thought form that continues to reinforce those feelings night after night. These forms persist not because they are intelligent, but because they are charged with emotion and given direction by repeated attention. Like spiritual echo chambers, they whisper the same messages until intentionally dismantled. Addictive behaviors, Cayce warned, create some of the most potent doorways. When the soul becomes entangled in cravings, whether for substances, power, or emotional pain, it opens itself to external energies that feed off those same frequencies. He noted that individuals suffering from addiction often experience strange dreams or auditory hallucinations at night. In some cases, they report waking at the same time every night, drenched in sweat or panic. These episodes, Cayce said, are often the result of non-physical influences feeding on the psychic rupture created by addiction. The remedy, he insisted, lies not only in physical detox but in spiritual purification and emotional reckoning. The presence of such entities also explains why certain people feel uncomfortable or afraid in specific rooms or buildings. In some readings, Cayce identified the lingering impressions of past traumas or the influence of deceased individuals who refuse to leave a space. These spiritual remnants become active primarily at night, when silence allows subtle vibrations to amplify. Sensitive individuals, especially children, can pick up on these presences more easily, often expressing their discomfort in vague terms: trouble sleeping, fear of the dark, or sensing someone there. Cayce advised not to dismiss these feelings, but to consider them intuitive signals that something energetic may be out of balance in the environment. Protection, then, becomes essential, not just physical, but energetic. Cayce was adamant that individuals should take deliberate steps to close the psychic doorways they may have inadvertently opened. Prayer, he said, was not a superstitious habit but a frequency calibration. When done sincerely, it elevates the soul's vibration, making it inaccessible to lower realms. He also emphasized forgiveness, not just of others, but of the self, as one of the most powerful tools for clearing attachments. In his words, forgiveness cleanses the channel through which the spirit flows. Without forgiveness, emotional toxins remain lodged in the field, continuing to attract what is unresolved. Crucially, Cayce believed that awareness itself acts as a barrier. Once an individual becomes conscious of the existence and nature of these entities, they are no longer operating in the dark. This shift alone weakens the grip of lower influences, for it pulls the individual out of unconscious agreement. Many who received readings from Cayce reported dramatic improvements simply by understanding what was occurring during sleep. Knowledge replaced fear, and fear being one of the primary lures of lower entities, lost its grip. In this way, light literal or metaphorical becomes a natural repellent. Just as physical darkness invites shadows, psychic darkness draws what thrives unseen. Just as awareness serves to weaken the grip of darker forces in waking life, its absence during sleep can leave an open gate to influences that often go unnoticed, until their effects become unmistakable. Edgar Cayce's exploration of the dream world went far beyond psychology. For him, dreams were not simply metaphorical messages from the subconscious, but portals, direct access points to dimensions that exist beyond the veil. In these spaces, the soul does not merely rest or reflect. It travels, it learns, and more. Crucially, it encounters. Not all these encounters are peaceful. The astral plane, according to Cayce, is not a passive dreamscape, but a layered battlefield where forces of both light and dark move with purpose. He explained that sleep is not an escape from reality, but a shift in the type of reality one experiences. While the body is at rest, the soul ascends or descends, depending on its vibration and intent. Those with elevated minds, hearts free from resentment, and a commitment to spiritual development are more likely to rise toward luminous realms of clarity, healing, and wisdom. Others, weighed down by anger, fear, addiction, or unresolved pain, may drift into denser, murkier layers of the astral world. These areas are more susceptible to distortion, more likely to be inhabited by energies that feed on emotional chaos. And it is in these lower strata that astral intrusion occurs. This intrusion does not take the shape of dramatic possessions or easily identifiable attacks. Cayce described it as a subtler form of psychic interference. Dreams may become distorted not in content alone, but in feeling. A person might find themselves in recurring scenarios where confusion reigns, being chased, lost in mazes, arguing endlessly, or failing to act while danger looms. These dreams do not arise from mere anxiety. Rather, Cayce noted, they often reflect spiritual battles occurring behind the scenes struggles, where the soul resists the grip of lower entities that seek to manipulate or influence it. The dream imagery, while symbolic, is symptomatic of something active and ongoing, a test of the soul's resilience, awareness, and allegiance. One of Cayce's most striking assertions was that dreams can be deliberately hijacked. Certain energies, he explained, linger in the lower astral with the aim of interfering in the human spiritual journey. These are not always conscious beings. Sometimes they are aggregates of negativity clusters of unresolved emotion, suffering, or fear that develop a semi-conscious will. In other cases, these forces are indeed intelligent, though often devoid of compassion or clarity. What they seek is not domination in the theatrical sense, but influence. They plant seeds, subtle suggestions, emotional triggers, whispered distortions. Their tactics are not to frighten overtly, but to alter belief, instill self-doubt, or fracture inner peace. Cayce's readings offer numerous examples where the emotional tone of a dream more than its symbols revealed the presence of intrusion. He urged individuals to examine not only what happened in the dream, but how it felt. Did the dream leave you inspired, comforted, or elevated? Or did it burden you with confusion, sorrow, or fear? This distinction, he taught, could point toward the origin of the dream's energy. Dreams infused with luminous clarity often followed nights of prayer or focused meditation. Dreams marked by chaos or disorientation tended to occur after emotional distress, unresolved conflict, or spiritual neglect. In one case, a woman described to Cayce a recurring dream in which she was always being watched by a faceless presence. She never saw who or what it was, but the sensation of being observed remained constant. Cayce responded that the dream was not simply about paranoia, but rather a reflection of an actual energetic interaction. The presence was real, an astral entity drawn to her emotional state of chronic self-doubt. Her fears, unchecked and unexamined, had created a frequency alignment that allowed this being to hover near her energetic field, particularly during sleep. Only by reclaiming her spiritual sovereignty through prayer, emotional release, and self-love could the connection be severed. This idea of energetic alignment was central to Cayce's teaching. The astral realm is not assigned, it is attracted. One does not accidentally fall into lower realms. Rather, the soul is drawn there by what it carries. Unresolved anger, persistent shame, jealousy, and grief act like weights. Conversely, joy, forgiveness, and compassion act as wings. During sleep, the soul gravitates toward whatever it most resembles. In this way, the dream world becomes a mirror and sometimes a minefield. But even in these darker spaces, the soul is not powerless. Cayce insisted that light travels with the soul, even into the densest realms. The spiritual self, when properly grounded, is not a victim but a warrior. Dreams that depict struggle, battles, confrontations, or resistance are often the soul's own defense mechanisms at work. These are not hallucinations, they are symbols of actual engagement. He described them as spiritual rehearsals, battles fought in the unseen to prepare the individual for choices or challenges in the physical world. The weapons are not swords or shields, but intention, memory, and will. Perhaps one of the most startling implications in Cayce's readings is that these nightly battles may have cumulative effects. A person who consistently fails to recognize or repel astral intrusion can gradually adopt patterns of behavior and belief that are not truly theirs. This is what makes psychic warfare so insidious. It doesn't demand submission overnight. Instead, it slowly erodes the inner compass, clouds perception, and numbs spiritual responsiveness. Over time, this leads to what Cayce called soul drift, where the individual, though still functioning, becomes spiritually disoriented. They begin to live reactively, absorbing outer influences rather than generating inner light. Conversely, those who engage with their dreams intentionally can begin to reclaim lost territory. Cayce advised individuals to record dreams immediately upon waking, not just for interpretation, but for energetic closure. Naming an experience, even one from sleep, restores spiritual authority. He also recommended invoking divine protection before rest, not as a superstition, but as a frequency-setting mechanism. This practice not only fortifies the aura but declares the soul's intent, which he believed served as a repellent to lower forces. Moreover, he suggested visualizing light surrounding the body while falling asleep. Light, in Cayce's cosmology, was not metaphorical but functional. It blocked entry, purified energy, and guided the soul through murky astral terrain. Ultimately, Cayce portrayed the dream world as neither a danger nor a sanctuary by default. It is what the individual brings to it. If the day was lived in fear, resentment, or deception, the dream world will reflect those vibrations. If the day ended in forgiveness, gratitude, and reflection, the soul will ascend to places where clarity and peace reside. What occurs during the night, he often reminded his clients, is not separate from waking life. It is the continuation of one spiritual path, written in a different language. Patterns emerged in the lives of many who sought Edgar Cayce's help, and among the most unsettling were the consistent accounts of nighttime disturbances that defied ordinary explanation. These weren't isolated nightmares or transient feelings of unease. They were persistent, often terrifying episodes occurring during the same narrow window between midnight and 3 a.m. That liminal zone Cayce identified as spiritually charged and vulnerable. The individuals involved weren't unwell in any diagnosable medical sense, nor were they prone to hysteria. Yet night after night, They experienced apparitions, immobilization, and psychological torment that no physician could explain. It was within these personal stories that Cayce's insights reached their most practical and urgent application. One of the earliest recorded cases involved a man in his early 40s who came to Cayce seeking relief from what he described as dreaded visitations. These episodes began precisely at 2 a.m. and were marked by a sudden awareness of a shadowy figure standing near his bed. He could never see its face, only its silhouette, tall, unmoving, yet undeniably sentient. The man reported being completely paralyzed, unable to scream, move, or even close his eyes. He would remain in this frozen state for several minutes, drenched in fear, until the figure dissipated. He awoke each time exhausted, with a throbbing headache and a tightness in his chest that lasted well into the following day. When Cayce entered his trance state to assess the situation, he confirmed the presence of a discarnate entity, an earthbound spirit who had, in Cayce's words, grown attached to the vibrational field of the subject through cycles of resentment. The man's unresolved anger toward a deceased family member had created an energetic bridge, drawing in a spirit with similar emotional residues. The prescription Cayce offered was not merely to confront the fear, but to dissolve its magnet. He instructed the man to perform nightly forgiveness rituals, focusing not only on others, but also on himself, and to place a small piece of white quartz under his pillow, symbolically and energetically reinforcing clarity and purification. Another memorable case came from a woman who experienced repeated awakenings at 12:45 am sharp. She described an intense sensation of being watched, followed by vivid dreams that felt more like invasions than subconscious wanderings. One recurring image disturbed her most: hands reaching from the ceiling to pull her upward, accompanied by a low humming sound that vibrated through her chest. When she described these experiences, her voice trembled, not from embarrassment, but because of how real and unshakable they felt. Cayce's reading revealed that she was being targeted by what he termed a thought form of ancestral grief, a kind of residual energy pattern passed through generations. Her lineage had experienced repeated trauma related to childbirth and separation, and this unprocessed emotional field had gathered density in the astral. Her own fear of motherhood and emotional isolation had aligned her vibrationally with this psychic residue. Cayce emphasized the importance of clearing this karmic link by consciously honoring her ancestors, not to venerate suffering, but to acknowledge and release the repeating cycle. He prescribed that she light a candle each night, naming aloud a blessing to the mothers in her line, thus transforming inherited pain into a conscious lineage of healing. A third account, more physical in nature, came from a young man plagued by nightly episodes of what modern science might term sleep paralysis. But this was no ordinary neurological quirk. He described it as being pinned to the bed by invisible pressure, coupled with the overwhelming sense of a presence sitting on his chest. The weight was so oppressive, he once believed he might die if it continued another minute. These episodes were always preceded by a cold drop in temperature in the room, and afterward, he'd find objects, books, a glass of water shifted from their original place, though he lived alone. Cayce's reading described the situation as a compounded one, a vulnerable auric field due to a recent period of depression, combined with the presence of an opportunistic, earthbound entity. The depression had acted as an open signal, weakening the man's spiritual boundaries and allowing an external influence to interact more forcefully. Cayce didn't simply diagnose the spiritual interference. He provided a precise protocol. First, the young man was to avoid electronic use 1 hour before bed to allow his natural frequency to stabilize. Second, he was to place cedar oil on the soles of his feet before sleep, a method Cayce often recommended to anchor the spirit firmly in the body. Finally, he advised the young man to speak a specific invocation aloud before sleep, affirming that his body and soul were sovereign and under divine protection. The final case that stood out in Cayce's files came from a mother desperate for answers about her teenage daughter. Every few nights, the girl would wake up screaming around 3 a.m., describing a woman made of smoke who whispered threats that no one else could hear. Doctors prescribed sleep aids and counseling, yet nothing changed. Her schoolwork declined, and she began to isolate herself, afraid to sleep even during the day. When Cayce reviewed the girl's case, he identified a psychic sensitivity inherited from a maternal grandmother who had also experienced dream visitations. What made this different, Cayce said, was that the daughter's energy was being fed upon not by a malicious ghost, but by a parasitic energetic form created by years of unspoken family conflict and emotional denial. The smoke woman was a projection, a symbolic embodiment of generational silence. To remedy the situation, Cayce asked that the family, mother and daughter together, speak aloud 3 times before bed. We release all that was never spoken. We walk now in truth and in light. He also recommended hanging blue cloth in the girl's room to instill calm and psychic shielding, as blue was associated with the throat chakra and energetic honesty. Not every person who sleeps through the psychic breach hour is visited by dark forces or haunted by invisible entities. In fact, many pass through the night untouched, shielded by unseen layers of spiritual stability. This distinction fascinated Edgar Cayce, who often explained that the difference between those who suffer nighttime interference and those who do not lies not in luck or divine favoritism, but in energetic constitution and karmic resonance. 4. Cayce, spiritual attacks were rarely arbitrary. They were more often than not invitations, unconscious ones sent out through invisible wounds, emotional distortions, or imbalances left unhealed across time. Cayce taught that the soul is not a blank slate born only once into a life of randomness. Instead, each soul carries a long and intricate history composed of past lives, relationships, actions, and consequences. This web of karmic threads isn't punitive, it's instructive. Where there is unresolved karma, there is unfinished business. And where there is unfinished business, the soul remains open. These openings are not just conceptual. They create subtle energetic holes or weakened fields through which non-physical forces may slip. When a soul carries unresolved guilt from a previous life such as betrayal, cruelty, or abandonment, it can unconsciously attract experiences or energies that echo the original wound. In this way, the soul magnetizes challenges not because it deserves to suffer, but because it seeks reconciliation and integration. Some of Cayce's readings explored these karmic vulnerabilities in astonishing detail. He explained that individuals who had once wielded spiritual power selfishly or manipulated others through fear were often born in later lives with energetic debts to pay. These debts were not about punishment, but restoration. The same soul might now find itself overly sensitive, empathic to a fault, or persistently exposed to low-vibration energies during sleep. The spiritual field, weakened by guilt or the absence of self-forgiveness, becomes more permeable. Malicious forces operating in the lower astral planes sense such vulnerability not as a conscious choice, but as a frequency pattern. Like predators drawn to blood in the water, they move toward what is energetically exposed. Yet past life karma is not the only factor. In Cayce's view, current life behaviors and emotional states can significantly influence susceptibility to spiritual attack. He frequently warned against indulgence in bitterness, self-pity, or unprocessed trauma, noting that such emotions lower the body's natural vibration. When vibration drops, the auric field, the subtle energy body surrounding the physical form, loses its coherence. Cracks appear in the field, often starting small, a cycle of worry, a shameful memory revisited again and again, or persistent grief left unspoken. Over time, these cracks widen, weakening the boundary that ordinarily protects the soul during its nocturnal excursions. Trauma, in particular, leaves deep psychic imprints. Cayce emphasized that experiences of shock, loss, or betrayal can fragment the soul's energy if not healed. These fragments don't disappear. They linger in the energy field as unresolved frequencies. During sleep, when the soul partially lifts away from the body, it moves through these fields, re-encountering the same pain. If that trauma is coupled with strong emotion, especially fear, it creates a beacon, unintentionally broadcasting the stress into the spiritual realm. The result is that certain people, though not consciously inviting harm, find themselves repeatedly targeted by entities that feed on or are drawn to such emotional residue. Cayce didn't frame this vulnerability as a moral failure. Instead, he viewed it as an urgent call to spiritual hygiene. Just as a weakened immune system makes the body more susceptible to illness, a neglected spiritual field invites influence. He advised his clients to be as intentional about clearing emotional debris as they were about physical health. This meant more than routine prayer or affirmation. It required a conscious willingness to face inner shadows, forgive old wounds, and raise one's frequency through compassion, truthfulness, and alignment with divine laws. Even thoughts, Cayce warned, carry weight. Habitual negative thinking about oneself or others creates an energetic echo that diminishes the soul's light. Repeated internal judgments or a constant focus on fear not only suppress personal growth, but act as signal flares for the astral world. Entities that dwell in lower realms are drawn to familiar energy patterns. If someone consistently dwells in anger or despair, even unknowingly, they become more visible on the spiritual radar. In contrast, individuals who strive towards self-awareness and vibrational refinement may experience psychic interference less frequently, not because they are immune, but because they are more resilient and less accessible. Importantly, Cayce also acknowledged that sensitivity plays a role. Some souls incarnate with thinner veils and greater perceptual openness. These individuals, often called empaths or intuitives today, may be more prone to spiritual attack, simply because their boundaries are more porous. This is not a curse, he noted, but a responsibility. Such people must learn to strengthen their energetic defenses through daily practices like visualization, breath work, or sacred ritual. Without such tools, their gifts can become liabilities, attracting interference that overwhelms rather than enlightens. Ultimately, Cayce's perspective was not one of fear but empowerment. Vulnerability to nighttime attacks, he insisted, is never permanent. Energetic weakness can be repaired. Karmic burdens can be resolved. Emotional fractures can be integrated. The work, however, must be conscious. The soul must take up the responsibility of its own cleansing, its own elevation. And in doing so, it begins to radiate a frequency no lower entity can inhabit. As Cayce emphasized, vulnerability is not destiny. While many may carry karmic imprints, emotional wounds, or energetic imbalances that increase susceptibility to spiritual interference, none are helpless in the face of such risks. His teachings repeatedly return to one key truth: protection is possible, and with commitment, the soul can become not just shielded, but fortified. Rather than rely solely on external intervention, Cayce encouraged the cultivation of daily spiritual discipline. Especially before sleep, he outlined practical, repeatable protocols to insulate the soul from lower vibrational forces, allowing for restful slumber, unimpeded dream work, and communion with higher realms. Protection begins long before the head meets the pillow. Cayce taught that the quality of the sleep state is often a direct extension of the state of mind one carries into it. Worries, grudges, and agitation from the day should not be permitted to accompany the soul into the astral. If they do, they not only disturb rest, they broadcast signals to energetic forces operating on the same emotional wavelength. To prevent this, Cayce advised a period of spiritual preparation before bed, starting with prayer. But not just any prayer, one rooted in sincerity, intention, and attunement. He described it as a calling in of the divine, rather than a plea for safety. The prayer itself, spoken aloud or inwardly, sets the vibration. It announces the soul's alignment with higher forces and invites their presence into the room, creating a resonance that lower entities cannot tolerate. He frequently recommended specific wording for such prayers, often invoking divine light, peace, and guidance. One commonly referenced invocation was, "Father, surround me with thy light. Let it shield me. Let it guide my spirit in purity and peace." This was not meant to be recited mechanically, but felt deeply, infused with the conscious awareness that it was shaping one's vibrational environment. Repetition, Cayce explained, was a method of sealing the intent. The more regularly this prayer was offered, the more naturally the energy field retained its coherence and strength. Alongside prayer, Cayce prescribed the use of natural oils to further support protection. Among these, cedarwood was especially important. Revered since ancient times for its purifying and grounding properties, cedar was said to stabilize the soul's frequency and anchor it within the body during the sleep cycle. Cayce suggested lightly anointing the solace of the feet or the forehead before sleep, creating a symbolic and energetic boundary. In addition to cedar, he also spoke favorably of frankincense and lavender, not just for their calming aromas, but for their subtle spiritual properties. Frankincense, in particular, was said to uplift the auric field, while lavender soothed emotional residue and tension that might otherwise act as entry points for interference. Equally critical to Cayce's protocol was the creation of a spiritualized sleep chamber. He believed that the physical space in which one slept could either support or hinder spiritual well-being. If the room held chaotic energy, whether from past arguments, electronic clutter, or emotional heaviness, it needed cleansing. Cayce's readings referenced the importance of spiritual cleanliness. Rooms that had hosted strong negative emotions should be aired out, blasted, and arranged with intentional harmony. A simple ritual, such as burning sage or incense while offering a spoken blessing for peace, could reset the energetic imprint of the space. He emphasized the use of natural materials in the bedroom wood, cotton, stone, suggesting that synthetic or overly stimulating environments disrupted subtle energies. Lighting also played a role. While total darkness was not discouraged, Cayce often recommended the use of a soft, blue night lamp or even a small candle lit during prayer time and extinguished before lying down. Blue, he explained, resonated with the throat chakra and helped bring truth and tranquility into the space. Mirrors should be covered or turned away from the bed, especially if one was experiencing frequent psychic disturbances, as they could act as portals or reflectors of astral energy, inviting confusion or intrusion. Cayce placed great emphasis on posture and body positioning during sleep. While not rigid in his instructions, he suggested that sleeping on the right side promoted greater peace and digestion. But more importantly, it encouraged circulation patterns that supported calm breathing and dream retention. He also cautioned against sleeping with the head pointed due north, as this alignment with the Earth's magnetic field could stimulate the nervous system, making the dream state more erratic and less receptive to higher influences. Instead, he favored an east-west orientation, with the head toward the east, if possible, symbolically and energetically aligning the sleeper with the rising sun. Renewal and spiritual ascension. One of the most powerful techniques Cayce recommended was visualization, particularly the visualization of white light. Before sleep, while lying in bed or during prayer, he urged individuals to picture themselves surrounded by a luminous, radiant field of pure white light. This wasn't simply an act of imagination, but a spiritual exercise in frequency alignment. The white light, in Cayce's teaching, represented divine essence. Visualizing it enveloping the body created a buffer zone, a barrier that separated the soul from astral debris and invited only those presences resonating with love, clarity, and truth. The technique could be done slowly, beginning with a breath, then imagining the light forming around the feet, gradually moving upward to the chest, the head, and finally extending outward in all directions. Some of Cayce's clients reported this not only enhanced their sleep quality, but brought profound changes to their dream life. Experiences became more lucid, guidance more direct, and disturbances significantly reduced. Others began waking up with spontaneous insights, intuitive clarity, or even spiritual messages evidence. Cayce said of the soul's deeper engagement with higher realms, now unimpeded by interference, thought to further seal the protective energy field. Cayce recommended setting an intention just before falling asleep. This could be as simple as affirming, "Only that which is of the highest light may approach me as I rest," or "I offer this night to the guidance of my higher self." Such declarations, though brief, acted like spiritual passwords. They reminded the subconscious and the surrounding energies that the soul was not drifting aimlessly, but entering the astral with clarity and purpose. For those who experienced persistent disturbances despite these measures, Cayce emphasized consistency over complexity. Rarely did he suggest exotic rituals or rare tools. Instead, he returned to the basics. Purify your thoughts, release your emotions, sanctify your space, raise your frequency, and declare your alignment with the light. In time, he explained, these small but powerful steps reshape the soul's vibrational signature. And once that signature rises beyond the reach of lower influences, the nightly passage into sleep becomes not a risk, but a return to peace, to clarity, to divine communion. Although Edgar Cayce consistently warned of the spiritual vulnerabilities that hover between midnight and 3 a.m., he never implied this window was wholly negative or to be avoided. In fact, buried within many of his readings are veiled suggestions that this very hour, so often labeled the witching hour, holds not only peril, but profound potential. As with many aspects of spiritual life, danger and opportunity exist in tension. Where the veil is thinnest, where the body relaxes and the ego surrenders, there lies not just exposure to lower realms, but access to higher ones as well. The same sensitivity that allows negative forces to infiltrate also opens the door for communion with divine intelligence, spiritual guides, and the deeper layers of the soul. Cayce often describes sleep as a sacred journey, a passage wherein the soul leaves the body temporarily and enters the spiritual realms to gather insight, receive healing, or fulfill unseen assignments. While most individuals remain unaware of these nightly excursions, advanced souls, or those trained in spiritual discipline, can learn to consciously interact with this process. Midnight, then, is not merely a vulnerable space to be shielded against, but a dimensional gateway that, if approached with reverence, can become a sacred threshold to higher consciousness. The key lies in intention. Cayce emphasized that the energies present at night respond to the spiritual posture of the individual. If one enters sleep in a state of fear, anger, or confusion, those are the vibrations that will be magnified and met. But if one lies down in peace, grounded in faith and guided by spiritual purpose, the same ethereal terrain can become fertile ground for revelation. This is where affirmations play a vital role. Cayce encouraged the use of short, present tense spiritual statements to set the tone for rest. These were not superficial mantras, but vibrational declarations, subtle commands to the soul and its surroundings. One powerful affirmation Cayce suggested before sleep was, "Let my body rest, my soul seek truth, and my spirit be guided by the divine." Spoken gently, with closed eyes and a relaxed body, such words align the consciousness with elevated frequencies. Repetition deepens the resonance. As the phrase is uttered with sincerity, it begins to structure the etheric field, much like tuning an instrument. Over time, the affirmation becomes a call signal and invitation to guides, angels, or higher aspects of the self to engage and assist. But words alone are not enough. Cayce knew that the soul requires preparation, just as the body does. In his readings, he offered sleep rituals that enhance spiritual receptivity during the midnight hours. These were simple but potent practices. A warm bath with Epsom salts to cleanse residual emotional energies. Journaling to release mental clutter. A moment of gratitude to shift attention from lack to abundance. These activities, performed quietly and with intention, begin a subtle alchemical process. The physical state becomes relaxed, the emotional body begins to open, and the soul readies itself to receive. More advanced techniques, such as dream incubation, were also a part of Cayce's teachings. He instructed individuals to write down a specific question, intention, or area of healing on a piece of paper and place it under their pillow before sleep. This act, though it may appear symbolic, served a deeper function. It anchored the request into the subconscious, directing the soul to seek answers while traveling the astral planes. Those who followed this practice often reported not only vivid dreams, but sudden flashes of insight upon waking, some even receiving names, dates, or visions that later proved accurate. To Cayce, the dream state was a two-way mirror. It reflected internal processes while also revealing glimpses from beyond the veil. And the midnight hour, in particular, offered the clearest window. It was during this time that he believed that soul could be most easily taught by spiritual teachers. In some cases, he suggested that individuals had met departed loved ones, guides, or aspects of their higher selves during these twilight sessions. The trick was remembering it. That is where dream recall became crucial. Cayce recommended keeping a notebook and pen beside the bed and making it a ritual to write down anything remembered, no matter how fragmented, immediately upon waking. Even a vague image or single word could hold symbolic weight. Over time, this practice conditioned the mind to retain more. In his view, dreams were not random byproducts of the brain, but spiritual messages encoded in symbol. The better one became at recognizing these symbols. The more fluent the dialogue with the divine became. Midnight, then, need not be feared. It should be respected. Cayce suggested that when approached consciously, it can become a time of immense clarity and transformation. Those who are spiritually prepared may find themselves not merely passive dreamers, but active participants, healers, messengers, students in a cosmic classroom. What begins as a moment of vulnerability can become the most empowered hour of the day, or rather, of the night. The transition from fear to faith, from avoidance to engagement, requires trust. It also requires consistency. As with any spiritual discipline, the benefits grow over time. The more one engages with the midnight hour, not as a threat, but as a teacher, the more richly it responds. What Cayce outlined was not a superstition, but a method, a roadmap for transforming the sleeping hours into sacred communion. In this reframe, the witching hour becomes the wishing hour, not for selfish desires, but for alignment with the soul's higher path. It is a chance to ask, to listen, to witness, and to remember. And in remembering, we reclaim what so many forget, that even in the darkest parts of night, light is not only possible, but waiting, recognizing midnight not only as a potential threat, but as a sacred opportunity changes everything. Once we reframe the space between waking and dreaming, we begin to see that spiritual mastery doesn't end when the conscious mind fades. Rather, it deepens. The night becomes a field of hidden instruction, a vast, symbolic terrain where the soul negotiates lessons, confronts distortions, and strengthens its alignment with divine law. And in this space, Edgar Cayce's deeper intention becomes visible. His warnings, often misunderstood as fear-based admonitions, were in truth calls to conscious vigilance, gentle reminders that passivity has no place on the spiritual path. Even while we sleep, Cayce never wished to alarm. His aim was always to awaken. He knew that for many, nighttime is treated as a surrender and assumed moment of helplessness, a retreat from agency. But in the soul's evolution, there is no pause, no off switch. What unfolds between midnight and dawn is just as spiritually consequential as our daily choices. The dream state, astral plane, and subtle energies that swirl in darkness all respond to the same universal laws. What we allow, what we invite, what we neglect, these still shape us. They ripple outward and become part of our waking reality. And this is why awareness, even in the quietest hours, matters. Spiritual strength, Cayce taught, is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to move through it with clarity and calm. He saw the soul not as a fragile flame, but as an eternal force that, when aligned, could command energies, dispel deception, and transform its own experience. Yet, without awareness, even the most luminous soul can become veiled. It isn't enough to believe in the light. We must cultivate it within ourselves, train it like a muscle, nurture it like a seed. This begins not in dramatic rituals or lofty knowledge, but in the daily and nightly commitment to show up consciously. That includes showing up in our sleep. To do so requires a shift in mindset. Sleep is not just a break from reality, it is a transition into another form of experience. The spiritual seeker must stop treating sleep as an unconscious lapse and begin approaching it as sacred ground. Every time we lay our heads down, we are stepping into the unseen. Whether we remember it or not, whether we believe it or not, our inner being continues its journey. Dreams, symbols, visions, and energies weave together in a silent tapestry that reflects our truest state. And so we are faced with a choice. Do we drift into this mystery unguarded and unaware? Or do we prepare with intention, grounded in spiritual purpose? Cayce's message encouraged the latter. He did not ask us to live in fear of midnight attacks, but rather to build spiritual resilience habits and disciplines that create a protective field around the soul. His protocols, though simple in practice, reflect this deeper teaching, that even when we surrender the body to rest, we do not surrender the soul to chaos. We carry our intention, our vibration, our devotion with us into the night. Prayer before sleep is not superstition. It is energetic architecture. Visualization is not imagination. It is vibrational blueprinting. Affirmations are not mere words. They are magnetic signatures that determine what is allowed to enter. These are the disciplines of the spiritually mature, those who do not rely solely on waking consciousness to define their growth. They train their minds not just to perform in the light of day, but to remain attuned when the world is quiet, when shadows stretch long, and when the soul is closest to its origin. In this way, Cayce's vision is radical. It proposes that enlightenment is not something we chase externally, but something we embody even in silence, even in darkness, even in dreams. Still, vigilance does not mean paranoia. The purpose is never to cultivate anxiety over sleep, nor to obsessively monitor every internal flicker. Rather, it's about cultivating a relaxed but alert inner posture, a readiness, a rootedness. Just as a lighthouse shines without fear, so too must we emanate presence without tension. In this space, We are less likely to be influenced by lower energies and more likely to receive higher insight. The soul that is calm, clear, and coherent is like a tuned instrument. It will resonate only with what is harmonically compatible. This is why clearing the heart is as important as cleansing the space. Grudges, resentment, unprocessed emotions. These weigh the soul down and leave it porous. Cayce spoke often of forgiveness not merely as moral virtue, but as energetic hygiene. To forgive is to remove emotional debris that could otherwise become magnets for interference. He saw spiritual hygiene not as a series of external acts, but as an inner alignment, a constant return to love, truth, and humility. The stronger this alignment, the less likely we are to be touched by fear-based energies, whether in waking life or sleep. And so the invitation becomes clear: to live with consciousness even when the eyes are closed. To see midnight not as a gap in awareness, but as a hidden temple where deeper work is done. To carry into that space the same devotion we show in meditation, the same clarity we seek in prayer, the same strength we apply in struggle. Because the soul never stops learning. It never stops creating. And the quality of its creation depends, in large part, on how present we are to its movement, even when that movement is subtle and wordless. Cayce's legacy is not simply one of predictions or paranormal insight. It is a body of wisdom that calls us back to inner sovereignty. His warnings about the night were never about helplessness, but empowerment. And now, perhaps more than ever, we need to hear them not to retreat from darkness, but to meet it with light. To become the guardians of our own inner worlds, not through control, but through clarity. Not through fear, but through faith. This is not just about sleep. It's about reclaiming every layer of our experience, waking, dreaming, and beyond as part of the spiritual journey. It's about realizing that our power doesn't pause at night. Our consciousness doesn't go dormant. The soul is always reaching, always navigating, always aligning with something. And we get to choose what that something is. So let the final challenge be this: become spiritually active, even in unconscious states. Speak to your soul before bed. Set your vibration with care. Ask to remember, to grow, to heal, even while you sleep. Train the mind to expect guidance. Prepare the heart to receive it. In doing so, the veil may thin, but not to frighten you. Rather, to show you just how much more there is to see, and just how powerful you've always been.